Okay, in this video we're going to go through these practice problems for that we've been working with through the whole first 6 weeks of school. And I want you to show all your calculations on graph paper. Make sure you see this little note I put here for you. All the calculations must be shown in graph paper. Okay, so make sure you get that handy because you're going to have everything that I do is going to be on graph paper. 3 to the 8th power. What do I mean 3 to the 8th power? That means 3/8. I'm going to convert 3/8 to a decimal. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little note here beside this word, beside this problem, because I am going to divide. And the way I'm going to do that, I'm going to set it up with this word right here. Hopefully you remember that. Typo, top in, bottom out. So I'm going to get a piece of graph paper here, and we have 3/8, right? So 3/8 is my fraction. I'm going to do the top number goes in, there's my 3, and the bottom number goes out. So 8 cannot go into 3, so I have to add a decimal and bring it up and add a 0. And now that that decimal is up there, I don't have to worry about it inside here. Now I know that 8 cannot go into 3, so I'm going to put a 0 on top of the 3. And 8 goes into 30, that's 4 times, right? Somebody stop me. Thank you. Alright, so it's not 4 times because 4 times 8 is 32. It's 8 times 3. 8 times 3 is 24. And when you subtract, you need to regroup. This 3 becomes a 2, and that 0 becomes a 10. So now we have 10 minus 4, that's 6, and 2 minus 2 is nothing. Then we add another 0 and bring it down. So we have 8 goes into 60 how many times? I know 8 times 8 is 64, so it's going to have to be one less than that, 8 times 7. And that is 56. So when I subtract, I'm going to have to regroup again. This 6 becomes a 5, and that 0 becomes a 10. So now 10 minus 6 is 4, 5 minus 5 is 0. And I can't stop until I get a remainder of 0 or a repeating decimal. So I'm going to have to add another 0 and bring it down, and now I have 40. So 8 goes into 40 evenly 5 times, because I know that 8 times 5 is 40, so my remainder is 0. And this is why it's very important to know all of your times tables, so that whenever you're dividing, you don't have to be guessing which one's which. You don't have to be working them out over here on the side. You know your times tables, and you can kind of figure out which is the next number coming up. So that's my answer right there. So let me go back to that page. So my answer for number 1, I'm going to put is 0.375. And the way we read that 0.375 is 375 thousandths. Okay, number 2, we're going to convert. Now we're going to convert the decimal right here, 32 hundredths, to a fraction. And we're going to do that. And then once we do that, we're going to write it in simplest form. That's very, very important. Make sure you know that. Okay, so the way we do that is we use our place value. Okay, so we're going to use our place value. Here we go. 32.32 is not read correctly. You have to read it as 32 hundredths, because this is the first place, the tenths place, and then this is the hundredths place. So this is 32 hundredths. So in order for me to do that, I'm going to get a clean page, and we have 32 hundredths. We're going to write it as 32 over 100. And now this is a fraction. So the last thing I have to do is reduce it. And I know that I can divide by 2, top and bottom, because 32 is an even number and 100 is an even number. So if I divide 32 by 2, I'm going to get 16. And if I divide 100 by 2, I'm going to get 50. Okay, now both of these are still even numbers, because I know 6 is an even number, and I know that 50 ends in a 0, so I know I can divide that by 2 at least. So I'm going to divide it by 2 again, see what happens. So if I divide by 2 again, 16 divided by 2 is 8, and 50 divided by 2 is 25. So my answer is 8/25. So I'm going to go back to that page, and I'm going to write down my answer. 8/25 was the fraction in simplest form for 0.32 or 32 hundredths. To convert 0.7 to a percent, now we have a decimal again, and we're going to convert it to a percent. And we're going to use something that we called Dr. Pepper. Remember that? We have a decimal right here. So because it's a decimal, we want to go to a percent, and that percent starts with a P. So the way that I'm going to do that for you here is I am going to show you with the Dr. Pepper. Okay, Dr. Pepper. We have, what decimal do we have? 0.7. So we're gonna start with 0.7, right? Just writing it down the decimal. And because we're going from a decimal to a percent, the decimal needs to go to the right. Okay, so I'm gonna move it twice from the D to the P. Start with a decimal. Here's my decimal. I'm gonna end up with my percent. Move it twice, and that little place right here, I have to fill in a 0. So now my decimal's in right here. Now I have my percent. That's 70. So my answer is 70%. Now there is another way you can do this. Without using Dr. Pepper, you can use place value again. And if you read this decimal correctly, we started with 0.7. Reading the decimal correctly would be 7/10. So as a fraction, it would be 7/10. And because we know that percent means out of 100, then we need to make this denominator be a 100. The only way we can do that is if we multiply this 10 times 10, and that gives me 100. If I do that to the bottom, I gotta do that to the top. So 10 times 7 gives me 70. So because that 70 is over 100, then my percent is 70%. You choose which way you want to do it. This way is the right way, is the correct mathematical way, but it is a little bit longer. If you can remember Dr. Pepper, and if you can understand that Dr. Pepper helps you remember which direction you move that decimal twice, then you can use Dr. Pepper on the test. But I also know this one, if Dr. Pepper confused you, don't forget about Dr. Pepper and use this other way of doing it. So then that number here was 70%. Okay, now we're going to convert 78% to a decimal. So 78%, whoops, 78% is going to have to change to a decimal. So now we have a percent, starts with a P, and then we're going to that D. So we're also using Dr. Pepper. So for both of these, I'm using the Dr. Pepper method, okay? And I'm going to get a clean page. We have 78%. So I'm going to start with 78%. Starts with a P, right? And that 78, that's a whole number. So any whole number has a decimal behind the whole number. So because we're starting with the percent, we want to go to the decimal. Dr. Pepper tells me I have to start with the P and go back to the D. So that means that this decimal is going to move to the left 2 times. So I end up with 0.78, and you can put a 0 in front of it if you like to. Again, that 0.78 is read correctly as 78 hundredths. It's all about place value. Now the other way you could work this one out, the correct way, would be 78, and it's a percent. So that means that it's a ratio compared to a 100. So 78 out of 100. If you simplify this, actually you don't have to simplify it, because we're not going to a fraction. 78 hundredths. Now read it correctly. 78 hundredths. So this first decimal, but first place value is the tenths. The second place value is the hundredths. So all I need to do is fill in that hundredths place with the last number, and then fill in the 7 in the correct place. So I end up with 0.78. So there's 2 ways you can do it with Dr. Pepper, or you can put it over 100 and then read it and use your place values. Remember, the first place is the tenths place, then the hundredths place. That's why we occupy the last place with the 8, so we can have 78 hundredths. And that's my answer, 78 hundredths. 78 hundredths. Okay, so going back to the first page, so we can write down our answer. 0.78 or 78 hundredths. Okay, now the next thing we have to do is we're going to have to convert this fraction right here, 3/25, to a percent. So now we're going from a fraction to a percent. And there is no shortcut for that except to make the denominator be a 100. This is an easy one because we know that 25 can be changed to a 100 really quickly. So remember this one, that percent means out of 100. If you cannot change the denominator to be a 100, then all you have to do is change it to a decimal and then change it to a percent. Okay, so let's do that one right quick. You have 3/25, and if we're going to change that to a denominator of 100, because that's what percent means, we have to multiply the bottom times 4. 25 times 4 is 100. So if we do that to the bottom, we gotta do it to the top. And 3 times 4 equals 12. So my percent is 12%. That's it, we're done. So now we're going to go to another page, to the back page, and we're going to write down that answer. 12%. Okay. Now we have 14%, and we need to change that to a fraction in simplest form. Okay, so let's see. Change this percent to a fraction, and it has to be in simplest form. Make sure you know that. 14%. Now the way we're going to do this is really easy. We're going to remember what percent means. Percent means out of 100. So I'm going to write 14. That was the right number, right? Yeah, 14%. 14% is the same thing as 14 out of 100, and I have my fraction. But this is not in simplest form because we have an even number on the top and an even number on the bottom. So at least I know I can divide both top and bottom by 2. And if I divide top and bottom by 2, 14 divided by 2 gives me 7, and 100 divided by 2 gives me 50. So my answer is 7/50. I can't reduce anymore because 7 is a prime number. So I'm done. So 7/50 is the answer for number 6. Okay, now we're going to look at the next section,